De Niro in tears. The explosive Scorsese interview that nearly ended their friendship. Before we get to the video, please write what state you are watching this video from, and now let's dive in. The studio was small but cozy. On the couch sat two men whose names had become synonymous with cinematic genius. Martin Scorsese, with his thick eyebrows and lively gaze, flipped through his notes. Robert De Niro, with deep wrinkles etched across his face, sat quietly. The host, a young journalist named Ethan Crow, had a reputation for digging deep. His interviews with actors often went viral because he wasn't afraid to ask uncomfortable questions. Today, he was determined to uncover something new about the collaboration of these two legends, but even he couldn't predict where this conversation would lead. "So, Marty Bobby," Ethan began, smiling, "you've been working together for half a century. Your films are cultural landmarks. But I want to talk about what happens behind the scenes. What keeps your friendship going so long?" Scorsese laughed, his voice raspy but warm. "You know, Ethan, it's like an old marriage. We fight, we make up, but at the end of the day, we both want the same thing, to tell a story that hits hard. Bobby is my eyes, my ears. He feels characters like no one else." De Niro nodded, but his smile was reserved. "Marty knows how to pull out of me what I don't always see myself. It's trust." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "But there must be moments when you disagree? When, say, you, Bobby, want to play a scene your way, and Marty has a different vision?" "Of course," De Niro replied, his voice low, almost a mumble. "But we talk. We always talk." Scorsese added, "Sometimes it's not just talk. It's yelling, gesturing, Italian drama." He laughed, and the studio audience joined in. But De Niro remained serious. Ethan sensed the shift in mood. He decided to push further. "You're both known for your dedication. Bobby, you've literally lived your characters' lives. For Raging Bull, you gained weight. For Taxi Driver, you drove a cab at night. But there's one role we rarely talk about. Your role as a father. Specifically, your relationship with Irene, your daughter." Silence fell. The cameras caught every sound: the creak of the couch, the faint hum of the spotlights, the distant buzz of the city outside. De Niro's face changed. His eyes, always seemingly impenetrable, narrowed, and his lips pressed into a thin line. Scorsese shot a quick glance at his friend, his eyebrows slightly raised. "Irene," De Niro repeated, his voice quiet but laced with tension. "Yes," Ethan pressed on, undeterred. "You rarely talk about her publicly. But she's part of your life, and it said your relationship hasn't always been smooth. How has that affected your work? Your roles as fathers?" Scorsese cleared his throat, his hand resting on De Niro's knee as if to calm him. "Ethan, maybe this isn't the best topic to." But De Niro raised a hand, stopping him. "No, Marty. Let him talk." The studio grew, so quiet you could hear the cameraman breathing. Ethan felt his heart pound. He knew he was treading on thin ice, but it was too late to back down. "I just want to say, Bobby, you're an icon. But you're also human. We all have our struggles. Irene mentioned in an interview that you two didn't speak for a long time. How do you deal with that?" De Niro took a deep breath. His eyes flashed, and for a moment it seemed he might stand and leave. But instead, he leaned forward, his voice trembling with restrained emotion. "You want to know how I deal with it?" he said, his New York accent sharpening. "You think you can just sit here and dig into my life because you're holding a mic? Irene is my daughter, mine, and what's between us isn't for your headlines." Scorsese placed a hand on De Niro's shoulder. "Bobby, easy. He's just doing his job." "His job?" De Niro turned sharply to Scorsese. "His job is to humiliate people? To ask about things he has no right to ask?" Ethan raised his hands, trying to defuse the situation. "I didn't mean to offend, Bobby. I just—" "You don't know what you're talking about," De Niro interrupted. His voice broke, and he looked away. "You don't know what it's like to be a father who doesn't always know how to be there." He fell silent, his eyes glistening with tears. Scorsese tightened his grip on his shoulder, his own face darkening. "Ethan," Scorsese said quietly, "you've gone too far." But Ethan, sensing he was losing control, took another step. "Bobby, I get that it's painful. But you've said in your films, the truth sets you free. Maybe talking about this." The truth. De Niro stood abruptly, his voice booming through the studio. "The truth is I love my daughter. The truth is I've made mistakes. But I'm not going to justify myself to you or anyone else." He tore the microphone from his shirt and tossed it onto the couch. The cameras tracked his every move as the crew froze. Scorsese stood, trying to stop his friend. "Bobby, wait. Don't go." But De Niro was already heading for the door. Before leaving, he paused and threw over his shoulder. "Marty, I thought you had my back." The door slammed. A dead silence settled over the studio. Scorsese turned to Ethan, his eyes blazing with anger. "You just broke something that took years to build," he said softly. "I hope it was worth your ratings." He walked out too, leaving Ethan alone in front of the cameras. A producer shouted through the earpiece, "We're live. Ethan, say something." But Ethan just sat there, staring into the void. Backstage, muffled voices could be heard. Scorsese had caught up with De Niro in the hallway. Their conversation was quiet but intense. "Bobby, you know I didn't want this," Scorsese said. "I tried to stop him." De Niro leaned against the wall, his face wet with tears. "I can't, Marty. I can't talk about her like that. Not in front of everyone." Scorsese nodded, his hand still on his friend's shoulder. "I know. But you can't just run. Let's go back. Show them who we are." De Niro shook his head. "I don't know if I can." The hallway of the studio on 57th Street was cramped and stifling. "Bobby, listen," Scorsese said, placing a hand on De Niro's shoulder. "You can't just walk away. This guy, Ethan, he crossed a line, but we won't let him win. We'll go back and finish this on our terms." De Niro looked away sharply, his jaw clenched. "Marty, I can't go back there and pretend nothing happened. He dug into my soul. About Irene. It's none of his business." Scorsese nodded, his eyebrows knitting together. "I know, and I'm just as mad as you are. But if you leave, it'll look like he broke you. And you're not the guy who breaks, Bobby. You're Robert De Niro, damn it." De Niro let out a short, bitter laugh. "Maybe I'm already broken, Marty. Maybe I'm just tired." Scorsese leaned closer, his eyes burning. "No, you're not tired. You're angry. And you have every right to be. But instead of running, let's use it. Go back in there and show that smug journalist he can't play with us like pawns." De Niro was silent, his gaze wandering over the cracks in the floor. From the studio, the sound of commotion filtered through, producers scrambling to save the live broadcast, and Ethan Crow, apparently, improvising to fill the silence. Ethan's voice came through the wall, smooth and self-assured. "And I think this reaction shows how deeply Robert feels his roles, his life." De Niro clenched his fists. "He's still talking," he muttered. "That little." Scorsese grabbed his arm. "Exactly. He thinks he's won. But we're not done. Come with me." De Niro looked at his friend, and a spark flared in his eyes, the same one that appeared when he prepared for his toughest scenes. He nodded slowly. "All right, Marty, but I'm doing this my way." Scorsese smiled, a faint grin lighting his face. As always. The studio doors opened with a soft creak, and all eyes snapped to the two men slowly returning to their seats. The cameras hummed, focusing on De Niro, whose face was stern but calm, like a man who'd made a decision. Scorsese walked beside him, his posture radiating confidence, though his eyes closely tracked his friend's every move. Ethan Crow, still holding the microphone and addressing the audience, froze mid-sentence. His smile faded as he saw De Niro take his seat. The studio audience whispered, sensing the tension escalate. Gentlemen," Ethan began, trying to regain control. "I'm glad you're back. We can continue." "No," De Niro cut in sharply, his voice low and cold as steel. "You don't get to continue. It's my turn to talk." Ethan blinked, his confidence starting to crumble. "Of course, Bobby. I'm all ears." De Niro leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Ethan's like a predator sizing up prey. Every movement was calculated, every word precise. "You think you can sit here, ask a few edgy questions, and call it journalism?" he began. "You think you have the right to dig into my life, my family, because you need clickbait for your show? You're wrong, Ethan, and I'm going to tell you why." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators, usually moving for better angles, stood rooted. Scorsese sat quietly, but his eyes gleamed with pride for his friend. De Niro continued, his voice growing firmer. "I've lived 81 years. I've made films you probably watched in school. I've made mistakes, plenty of them. And yes, some of them were about my family. But you know what I've learned? Real strength isn't in shouting or running away. It's in facing the truth and saying, yeah, I'm not perfect, but I'm trying. And you? You don't even try to understand the people you interview. You just look for a weak spot to jab at." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but De Niro raised a hand, silencing him. "I'm not done. You asked about Irene, about my daughter, and you thought I'd just sit here and let you dissect my life like it's some reality show. But let me tell you something, Ethan. My love for my family isn't your story. It's mine, and I won't let you or anyone else twist it." Scorsese nodded, his hand resting on the back of the couch as if supporting De Niro. "Bobby's right," Scorsese added, his voice calm but sharp. "You crossed a line, Ethan. Journalism isn't about humiliating people. It's about finding the truth, not manufacturing drama." Ethan tried to defend himself, his voice trembling. I just wanted to show Bobby's human side. To show that even legends have struggles." De Niro shook his head, his gaze almost pitying. "You're not showing the human side, Ethan. You're trying to make me a victim for your audience. But I'm not a victim. I'm a man who's lived a life full of highs and lows. And I don't need your pity or your headlines." The studio audience erupted in applause. Some even stood, shouting words of support. Ethan sat, his face flushed, his hands nervously clutching the microphone. He knew he'd just lost, not just an argument, but his entire reputation. De Niro leaned back, his chest heaving. He looked exhausted, but there was something new in his eyes, relief, as if he'd shed a burden he'd carried for years. Scorsese patted him on the shoulder, his smile warm and genuine. "Well, Marty," De Niro said, turning to his friend, "maybe now we can talk about movies?" Scorsese laughed, and the tension in the studio began to dissipate. "Sure, Bobby. Let's talk about what we love." The broadcast ended, but the buzz didn't stop. The video of De Niro destroying Ethan Crow went viral, racking up millions of views in hours. Older audiences, especially those over 55, shared it on social media, marveling at how De Niro defended his dignity and family. "This is what a real man looks like," they commented. "He reminded us there are things that aren't for sale." Ethan Crow vanished from the spotlight for weeks, his show lost sponsors, and his reputation took a hit. But for De Niro and Scorsese, this wasn't just a studio victory. It was a moment when they reminded the world, and perhaps themselves, that their friendship and principles were stronger than any provocation. Backstage, as the cameras shut off, De Niro stood by a window, gazing at New York's lights. Scorsese approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You were incredible, Bobby," he said. De Niro smiled for the first time that evening. "Thanks, Marty. But I think I need to call Irene." Scorsese nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "Do it, and tell her old man can still bring the heat." Robert De Niro stood by the window of his Upper East Side apartment, phone in hand. Martin Scorsese sat in an armchair nearby, sipping whiskey from a low glass, his glasses resting on a coffee table next to a stack of scripts. "Did you call her?" Scorsese asked, his voice soft but tinged with concern. De Niro nodded, not taking his eyes off the city. "Yeah, She didn't pick up. Left a message. Scorsese leaned back, his fingers tapping the glass. She'll call, Bobby. Irene knows you love her. Just give her time. De Niro turned, his face tired but calm. The storm in the studio, where he'd dismantled Ethan Crowe's arrogance, left a strange feeling, a mix of relief and emptiness. He sat across from Scorsese, his hands resting on his knees. You know, Marty, I thought after I said all that to the kid, I'd feel better. But, he sighed, it's not about him. It's about me. About how I wasn't there for her when I should have been. Scorsese leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. You're too hard on yourself. You did everything you could. And you're still trying. That's more than most can say. De Niro shook his head, his voice quieter. But is it enough, Marty? I've played fathers in movies. I know how it looks on screen. But in life, I didn't always know what to do. Scorsese set his glass down and stood, walking over to his friend. He placed a hand on De Niro's shoulder, as he had countless times during their long friendship. Nobody knows, Bobby. We're all improvising. But what you did in that studio today, how you stood up for your family, your truth, that was real. And Irene will see it. Millions of people saw it. The New York morning was gray. De Niro sat in his favorite cafe on Columbus Avenue, a small place with worn wooden tables and the scent of freshly baked croissants. He loved it for its anonymity. No one bothered him for autographs or selfies. A cup of espresso sat untouched before him. His phone lay on the table, its screen dark. The interview had become a sensation. On social media, people shared clips of De Niro tearing into Ethan Crowe, calling him a journalist chasing headlines. Newspapers ran stories. De Niro defends family in epic showdown. Older audiences, especially those over 55, saw more than a TV moment. They saw a man standing up for his dignity, proving that even in a world where everything is laid bare, some boundaries can't be crossed. For them, it was a story of principle, of fighting injustice with words, not fists. But for De Niro, it wasn't about winning. It was about finally speaking the truth to himself, to the world, and maybe to Irene. His phone buzzed, and he flinched. The screen lit up with a name, Irene. De Niro froze, his heart racing. He slowly picked up the phone and answered. Irene. His voice was hoarse, filled with hope. There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet, familiar voice. Dad, I saw the interview. De Niro gripped the phone tighter. I didn't know what to say. That guy, he... I know, Irene interrupted. Her voice was soft but carried strength. You didn't have to do that. But you did. For me. He closed his eyes, feeling a hot wave rise in his throat. I didn't want it to look like I was making excuses. I wanted you to know you're important to me. Always have been. Irene sighed, and De Niro pictured her smile, the same one she had as a kid when he picked her up from school. I know, Dad. We haven't always understood each other, but I know. They talked for a few more minutes about small things, her job, New York. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, no tears or dramatic embraces like in Scorsese's films. But it was a start, a small step that meant more than any Oscar. When the call ended, De Niro set the phone down and took a deep breath. He looked out at the street, where people hurried about their lives, and for the first time in a long while, he felt lighter. The cafe hummed with quiet conversations, smelling of coffee and fresh bread, and there was something comforting in its ordinariness. Weeks later, Scorsese and De Niro met in a Manhattan office to discuss a new project. It wasn't another gangster epic, but something different, a story about family, mistakes, and how people find their way back to each other. Scorsese joked it was their least cinematic script, but his eyes showed he believed in it. This is for Irene, right? Scorsese asked as they finished their coffee. De Niro smiled, his wrinkles deeper, but his eyes bright. For all of us, Marty. Ethan Crowe never regained his former glory. His show was canceled, and he faded from the public eye, reduced to a footnote in internet memes. But for De Niro and Scorsese, that no longer mattered. They moved forward, as always, carrying the lessons of the past and hope for the future. New York kept living. Taxis honked, pigeons cooed on rooftops, and the smell of hot dogs from street carts mingled with the autumn breeze. And in that endless motion, there was hope that even small steps, like a phone call or an honest conversation, could change everything. Not instantly, not completely, but enough to begin.